Hello, thank you for joining Workshop 8 of The Black Family, United by History, Restored by Storytelling, brought to you by New York Life. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History, in collaboration with Archival Alchemy, presents this national program that highlights the legacy of Black family reunions while encouraging families of all backgrounds to build and renew their own familial traditions and stories. We encourage you to watch the rest of the videos in this series to learn more about oral storytelling, genealogy, and familial archiving. Once you view all of the videos, you could receive a certificate as a family historian from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Be sure to subscribe to ASALH TV, ASALH's YouTube channel, and check out the YouTube description as well as the website for more information on this project. And now, let's get into Workshop 8, Finding Your Family and Governmental Records, led by Denyce Peyton. Denyce Peyton is a genealogist with 25 years' experience providing professional research since 2004. Her specialties are African Americans, research methodologies, evidence analysis, and 19th, 20th century investigations. To learn more about Denyce and her work, please read her full bio in the YouTube description.
Greetings, I'm Denyce Peyton, and I will be guiding you through finding African American families with records created by the federal government. A quick synopsis of what we will review includes descriptions of 4 federal record types: the U.S. Freedmen's Bureau, Freedmen's Bank, federal census schedules, and population and non-population, and Civil War United States colored troops, service, and pension index records. We'll review 2 case studies that I prepared, demonstrating the use of federal records in identifying African American individuals, families, and their life events. And then I will summarize the research process that I used for each case. The Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, otherwise known as the Freedmen's Bureau, was established in the War Department in 1865 after the Civil War. The National Archives Education Resources page featuring the Freedmen's Bureau included this information: that the Bureau provided assistance to tens of thousands of formerly enslaved people and impoverished whites in the southern states and the District of Columbia after the Civil War. And because there were so many states, the Freedmen's Bureau established branch offices throughout that area to help service the population. It helped freed people establish schools, purchase land, locate family members from whom they had been separated, and legalize marriages. The Bureau also supplied necessities such as food and clothing, operated hospitals and temporary camps, and witnessed labor contracts between freedmen and plantation owners or other employers. The article goes on to say that the funding limitations and deeply held racist attitudes that developed during this Reconstruction period forced the Bureau to close in 1872. The Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, otherwise known as the Freedmen's Bank, was chartered by Congress in 1865 to benefit formerly enslaved individuals. The National Archives has reproduced 55 volumes of signatures and personal identification information of the depositors. And this is published on their microfilm roll M816. These 55 volumes include information, family and personal information on thousands and thousands of depositors. The Freedmen's Bank was a separate entity from the Freedmen's Bureau. It was chartered as a banking institution. Freedmen's Bank branches collected significant amounts of personal data from their depositors, including name, birth location, and age. A physical description was entered in based on the observances of the clerks taking the information, and that included the height, complexion, and sometimes identifying scars. If the depositor provided this information, former enslaver names were included or names of current employers, parents' names, spouses' names, children's names, and names of siblings and sometimes aunts and uncles were also provided on the card. So if we had a fairly complete depositor's card, that would give us the beginnings of a pretty basic family tree for some people. The Freedmen's Bank closed in June 1874 due to a few factors. One was a change in the charter by Congress, which changed the way it was managed. There were economic conditions in 1873 that probably influenced or reduced the number of depositors during that time. And then there was reported mismanagement within the bank itself. The assets of the bank were not protected by the federal government, so the insurance that we know of today in terms of banking institutions was not in effect for the Freedmen's Bank, causing thousands of people to lose their savings deposits without any recourse for recouping any of their cash. These are two samples of Freedmen Bank's records. Each state appeared to create their own form. So this one on the left from Jerry Quinn is for the state of Kentucky. He was a resident of Louisville, Kentucky in 1865 when he applied. He provided the names of his master as Albert Baker and his mistress as Nancy Baker, and the plantation on which he was enslaved, he said, was in Jefferson County, Kentucky. The clerk documented that Jerry was 5 feet tall, 5 feet 11.5 inches tall, and of black complexion. Jerry supplied the information that he was married, but he did not name his spouse's name. His children's names were Ben, Caroline, and Jerry. And Jerry Quinn was also a veteran of the USCT forces. He served in the 123rd Regiment, Company C, out of Kentucky. His place of birth was Wayne County, North Carolina. And as I said, he resided in Louisville, Kentucky in 1865. His occupation was given as soldier and farmer. So he may still have been an active soldier by 1865 because some men did not muster out until 1866. The clerk wrote in the remarks that Jerry had a small scar under his right eye and a mole in his right eyebrow. He deposited a total of $530 on October 27th, 1865. Keziah Shepard, in the next card, resided in Alabama, and he applied in April of 1873. He reported that he had been born in Alabama and raised there. His age was given as 23 and his complexion was brown. His occupation was farmer and he was employed by Frank Beasley. Keziah's wife's name was Frankie, and he had two children, Mary and Franklin. In addition to naming his immediate family, he also went on to name his father as Alfred, his mother Lucy, one brother Alfred, and four sisters, Martha, Clarice, Letta, and Laura. And he instructed the clerk to write in the remarks, "If I die, I wish any of my money in this bank be given to my children." The first US Census occurred in 1790, listing only head of household by name. And from 1790 to 1840, the Census Bureau managed the census schedules in this way, where only the head of household was listed by name, and other members of the household were identified by tick mark by gender, color, and an age range. If a freed person was enumerated during these years in the census, they were named as head of household, and their members of their household were actually accounted for in a separate schedule or separate section of the schedule for freed persons of color, or in some cases, enslaved persons, identifying them by gender, color, and age range. The census enumerations in the United States are conducted every 10 years. In 1850, they changed the enumeration so that the names of all freed persons would be listed in the household, including personal information such as age and occupation, and any other information that the Census Bureau required for that respective year. This only included free persons. So in 1850 and 1860, only freed persons were enumerated on the population schedule. Federal slave schedules were enumerated in 1850 and 1860, and they included by name the enslaver. Underneath the enslaver, enslaved individuals were listed by gender, color, and approximate age. It was very rare to see an enslaved person listed by their given name in these slave schedules. I've seen a couple of examples of it, but it's very rare. Since 1850, the census enumerations have provided personal information about individuals in a household. And beginning in 1880, moving forward to the present, the relationship of an individual to the head of household is listed. So from 1880 on, we're able to identify what the relationship is of everyone in the household. If they were not related, often they were listed as being a boarder or a lodger. And sometimes I've seen friend listed as well. Non-population schedules were also enumerated between 1850 and 1880, and we'll discuss one of those, that it's the agriculture schedule that deals specifically with farmers and their land and farm production. African-American soldiers began enlisting in the United States colored troops to serve in the Civil War from 1862. And this is resulting from the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. USCT regiments were segregated. They were commanded by white officers, and some African-American soldiers were promoted up through the ranks as non-commissioned officers up to maybe sergeant or sergeant major, but none were commissioned officers. Because the USCT was segregated in its own units or regiments, the records that the United States developed and maintained for them are categorized under either USCT or the United States. So you won't be able to find a USCT soldier who served from Kentucky if you look in the state of Kentucky. And this actually applies to us accessing these online records today. If we want to search, we need to use the USCT category or United States category so that we can access the USCT regiments. For those individuals who enlisted, a compiled military service record was established and maintained to chronicle events beginning from their enlistment through their muster out or discharge or death date if they died while in service. If they died while in service, there were documents included in the service record identifying the cause of death and the date of the death and location. If an individual was treated for a medical condition, then there may be some medical records that are listed in the service record as well. Pensions were granted to those who applied and were able to prove identity and service. The government was very careful about trying to prevent fraud. So they ran a lot of individuals through a process whereby they had to submit affidavits, and anyone who testified on their behalf submitted affidavits as well. So pensions were granted to soldiers for disability and to widows and minor children as survivor benefits. There are some parents, surviving parents, who have applied for pension as well. The pension process itself could have lasted a few months to maybe a year or two because of the requirement of providing affidavits, not only by the applicants themselves, but close family members, extended family members, sometimes family and people who served in the unit with the soldier, or people who worked with the soldier and knew them for years, were requested to submit affidavits to testify how they knew them, how long they had known them. And in the case of marriages, if a widow did not have a legal marriage certificate, she would have to enlist the aid of an attorney to help try to document that, so that she could document the fact that she was the widow of the soldier. So this could have gone on for a long time. There are some full pension records which consist of maybe 50 to 80 to 100 pages because of the numbers of affidavits and documents that were required. There are pension index records that we may access online at familysearch.org, ancestry.com, or fold3.com. Ancestry and Fold3 are paid subscription sites. There are public libraries who pay for subscriptions, and it may be possible for library patrons with a card to access those databases. The Family Search databases are free of charge, but Family Search requires that individuals create an account with username and password. The database for the pension index cards is the General Index to Pension Files 1861 to 1934. This database is also available at the National Archives on microfilm. Pension records may be ordered from the National Archives by completing NATF Form 85 for each Civil War soldier for whom you're requesting. And there's more information on that in the workshop materials. In the following cases, I am demonstrating the use of federal records to document and validate African American individuals, families, and life events. This is Perry Banks from Mississippi, and I first encountered him while I was actually just searching the Freedmen's branch at Vicksburg, Mississippi. This is an affidavit of identity on behalf of Rose Anderson. And Rose Anderson was the widow of George Anderson, and she was applying either for back pay for her husband or possibly pension benefits. And so she went to the Freedmen's branch for assistance. Perry identified himself as having been a private in the USCT 5th Heavy Artillery Company B. He also stated that he had known Rose for about 20 years and her husband, and he served in the USCT 5th Heavy Artillery with George Anderson, her husband. So he knew them both and knew that she was his widow. I was not able to locate much more information on George and Rose Anderson, so I followed the research trail of Perry Banks. And since he had given information that he was a USCT soldier, I retrieved his compiled military service record. And these are just 2 pages from that record. The first one indicates that he enlisted in March of 1864 at Vicksburg, Mississippi. He gave his age as 28 years, and his occupation was laborer. Now, if he was enslaved at the time, this would have meant that he was a laborer on someone's farm or plantation, not working for pay. He enlisted for 3 years, and the clerk, I described him as having black eyes, black hair, and black complexion. He was 5 feet 6 inches tall. The next page is not very clear, but I wanted to at least abstract it, showing that Perry mustered out or was discharged at Vicksburg on May 20th, 1866. So that would have been after the end of the Civil War. This is the Freedmen's Bank record that I retrieved for Perry, and it includes his USCT regiment and company, which matches that of what was in his compiled military service record, and also matches the information that he provided in the affidavit of identity. So that indicated to me that I was still looking at the same Perry Banks that I was researching. He applied as a depositor in February of 1869 in Mississippi. He reported that he was born in Madison County, Mississippi, similar to his service record. His age here was listed as 31. His complexion was brown, and his occupation in 1869 was farmer. He worked for an individual whose surname was Divine. Perry's wife's name was Darkus, and they had a son named Billy in 1869. An extract of the 1870 census for Madison County, Mississippi shows Perry and his family listed. For some reason, the enumerator wrote that Perry's given name was Prairie. So I don't know if he misunderstood what the informant was telling him, or if that's how he thought Perry was spelled. But this is Perry Banks, based on the fact that he has Dorcas in the household and William Banks, or Billy Banks, in the household. He was listed as a farm laborer. Dorcas was listed as keeping house, so she wasn't working outside of the house. William Banks is listed, and additionally, there is a set of twins born about October 1869, Ollie and Oliver, who were about 7 months old. And you'll notice here that Ollie Banks was identified as a male, just as the twin brother Oliver was. By 1880, Perry Banks and his wife had actually had an additional 4 daughters. He was enumerated as age 40, and he was a farmer, and it listed that he could not read or write. Darkus, whose name was spelled now as Darkus, D-A-R-K-O-S, was a farm laborer, and William was a farm laborer. So they probably both worked on the family farm. In 1880, Ollie Banks is identified as a female. Since the twins were 10 years old, it was probably easier to discern whether they were male or female. So I suspect that that is why her gender changed. Hattie Banks, Mary Banks, Nettie Banks, and Maggie Banks were born between 1870 and 1880. And there is a 16-year-old nephew identified, well, a 16-year-old male identified as the nephew of Perry Banks, living in the household and working as a farm laborer as well. Perry was listed or enumerated in the census between 1870 and 1920. I just wanted to highlight some notes from 1910, because the 1910 federal census was unique in that the Bureau provided a column for individuals who were veterans to confirm whether they were a veteran of the Confederate Army or the Union Army. So Perry Banks is listed in 1910 as being 72 years of age. He was married for a second time for about 3 years. So this indicates that his first wife, Dorcas, must have died sometime before 1907. He was a farmer on his home farm, and he rented that farm. And he did confirm that he was a survivor of the Union Army. Adeline Banks was Perry's second wife. She was listed about 20 years younger than him. The enumerator claimed that she had been married, this was her first marriage. So it could be that her relationship, a previous relationship, was common law, and she did not have a legal marriage certificate. So he listed this as her first marriage. She had given birth to 6 children in her life, and 6 of those children were surviving in 1910. Given her age, they were probably grown and moved out of the household, because they're not listed in the Banks household. A Joseph Hall, age 17, was listed in the household with Perry and Adeline. And the census enumerator listed him as being the grandson-in-law, which suggests that he was probably a grandson of Adeline. And this was his way of saying that Joseph was not Perry Banks's blood grandson. This is the pension index card for Perry. He included his USCT 5th Heavy Artillery Regiment and Company B, which matches all the previous records that I retrieved for him. In September of 1899, he filed for disability, and that's why it's listed in the invalid line. Upon filing, he was issued an application number and a certificate number, and it states that he filed from the state of Mississippi. So for individuals who are interested in ordering the full pension record of an individual, this is the information that would be needed. So it's crucial to retrieve a copy of the pension index card so that you have the vital information to provide to the National Archives so that they can ensure that they're retrieving the records of the accurate person. In summary, I was able to identify Perry Banks as a USCT soldier from the Freedmen's Bureau record set that I identified. I retrieved his compiled military service record and his pension index card by searching the USCT record set. The Freedmen's Bank record set provided me with a copy of his deposit record application, and that included personal information, as you saw. So moving into the federal census enumerations, I was able to locate Perry Banks and confirm that he was the same Perry that I had been following through the other 3 federal record sets. The census enumerations supported his identity, his family data, occupation, and residence. As I gathered all this information together, I was able to correlate the evidence and to validate that the Perry Banks that I had begun researching was the same Perry Banks throughout all of these federal record sets. The Barnwell County, South Carolina case is an example of the Freedmen's Bureau labor contracts, indenture, and apprenticeships records. These labor contracts were executed between landowners and laborers across the South. The labor contracts were entered into by the parties and documented by the Freedmen's branch office personnel. The contracts included terms under which laborers were to work, the supplies provided to them by the landowner, and payment amounts for the work in the form of crop shares. John Holly of South Carolina entered into such a labor contract with at least 40 freed men and women in 1868. And I say with at least 40 because 40 individuals, 40 heads of household or heads of family signed off by creating their X on the contract. However, those individuals would have had family members or household members who likely participated in the work for John Holly. This is an image of the first page of the contract. And I realize that you can't read it off of the screen, but I just wanted to demonstrate that it was a legal contract or legal agreement, just as the legal documents that we find filed in county courthouses and federal courthouses. This one consisted of 3 pages. The contract obligations of John Holly were to furnish all horses, land, and plantation tools needed, one half the feed for the horses that the laborers were using to help work on the general plantation. He also furnished lots or parcels of land for extra crop, and these were either attached to or near houses that he provided to the head of household or family for dwelling while they were working the contract. Cultivation of these house parcels was only allowed during one half of every other Saturday. The workers were restricted from cultivating the extra crop parcels so that they could be involved in the general farm or general plantation work. Holly promised to divide equally to freedmen one half his entire crops of corn, fodder, peas, cotton, and potatoes. So this represented the crop share that the contractors would receive at the end of the term. Terms and conditions were likely directed by John Holly, and the freedmen and women who signed off on that by their ex were just agreeing to those terms. The contract obligations of the freedmen and women included the promise to work 10-hour days from the date of the contract to the end of the crop or the cultivation, and to work 8-hour days during harvest of the crop. Sickness was documented as an acceptable excuse to miss work. There was an implied dollar value placed on the value of the work performed by freedmen and women, which was $1 per day or 10 cents per hour, although they were paid through crop shares. And this reference to the dollar or the 10 cents per hour was made when, during the explanation of what an excused absence from work was, and if a contractor missed work without an excuse or without consent, that they would be docked the $1 per day or 10 cents per hour, which implies that that would have gone on their account against them, and they would have owed that at the end of the contract. The freedmen's share toward horse feed was 6 bushels of corn and 300 pounds of fodder per month. They agreed to provide that. And they also agreed that failure on their part to perform contract requirements would result in discharge by Holly or his agent, and in the loss of their entire interest in crops. This is what I call the signature page of the contract, and the given and surname of 40 individuals was listed, and next to their name, they marked the X. So it appeared as though none of them could write, or it was just assumed that they couldn't write, so they didn't provide a signature. This was executed on March 23rd, 1868, although the contract referenced that the contract term started January 1868. I surveyed the 1870 and 1880 Barnwell County federal census and retrieved enumerations for many of the freedmen and women who were cited in the 1868 labor contract. I searched for these individuals using the examples of some of the surnames in the contract, such as Hankerson or Hankison, Holly, Hay, and Sanders. There were at least 2 or 3 pages in both of the census years where individuals with these same or similar surnames were listed, living in close proximity to one another. So many of those individuals who may not have been cited by name in the 1868 labor contract may have actually helped to work that contract. The agriculture schedules is one of the non-population census schedules, and they're non-population because they do not list residents and members of a household and their personal data. The 1870 and 1880 agriculture schedules for Barnwell County included enumerations for Jacob Hankerson, Israel Hankerson, Henry Hankerson, Milford Holly, and many others. The schedules listed land value, value of farm productions, and livestock, and other data that was relevant to the farming industry. This is an image of the 1880 agriculture schedule for Barnwell County, and it does list Jacob Hankerson, Israel Hankerson, Henry Hankerson, and Milford Holly. I abstracted the information from Milford Holly's entry, showing that he was the owner of the land that he worked, and that consisted of 65 acres of improved land, 115 acres of woodland. The cash value of the farm was listed at $500. The cash value of farm implements and machinery was listed at $20. And keep in mind, this would have been before tractors, so that's why the implements and machinery were listed at $20. The cash value of livestock was listed at $150, with an estimated value of all farm production listed at $700. Milford Holly's entry also included that he had one horse and one mule that helped in the cultivation of his land. He did not list that he had paid any wages in 1880 to any farm workers. So I went back to check his 1880 population census, and it listed a household of 8 individuals, and at least 6 of those individuals were listed as working as laborers, and they were old enough to have helped work on the farm. I was a little curious about John Holly, the landowner who contracted with the freedmen and women in 1868. I retrieved his 1860 federal slave schedule, and it listed him by name as the enslaver. And these 2 pages that are shown here included the full listing of his slaves, which enslaved individuals, which totaled 125 people. The census enumerator also included that 9 houses were provided for the use or the dwelling of 125 enslaved people, which didn't quite seem like many buildings to me. So they must have been barrack type buildings where several families dwelled in them together. Because of the fact that John Holly enslaved 125 people in 1860, I checked his population census, and this abstract shows that he was listed as a planter by occupation, and his real estate value in 1860 was $130,500. That's 4.2 million in today's dollars. The personal property in 1860 was valued at $109,900, and this would have been the category where the estimated values or assigned values of the 125 enslaved people would have been included. This is almost $3.6 million, 3.6 million in today's dollars. So it's evident that he was quite a wealthy man. Even in today's terms, he would be wealthy. In summary of the Brown County, South Carolina case, based upon the 1860 census statistics for John Holly, both in the population and in the federal slave schedule, it is likely that he still owned significant property in 1868, which required him to enter into a labor contract to have his plantation or his farm worked by others. I tried to retrieve an 1870 population census schedule for him, and I did not find anything in Barnwell County or in South Carolina in surrounding counties. It could be that he was deceased between 1868 and 1870 because his birth year was estimated as 1793. This case is an example of how labor contracts were administered through the Freedmen's Bureau. They provided documentation of hiring practices, the given and surname of contracted workers, and the terms and conditions of the contracts, which give us a view of the conditions and circumstances under which the freedmen and women worked. Further investigation may reveal evidence of some of these freed persons who are listed in this case appear in other Freedmen's Bureau area records and or Freedmen's Bank records. In summary, we're gaining easier access to 3 of the federal record sets through digitization and indexing online. And those are the Freedmen's Bureau, which operated from 1865 to 1872, the Freedmen's Bank, which operated from 1865 to 1874, and the United States Colored Troops records, which began in 1862 and went beyond into the early 20th century because of management and administration of pensions. So I think this project helps us to understand that we're provided with a window to invaluable records and to life events of formerly enslaved individuals between 1865 and 1874 into the early 20th century. Had there not been a Civil War, 3 of these agencies would not have been created as independent type agencies who documented for the lives of formerly enslaved individuals, and we would not have this information. Federal census schedules have been around since 1790, and we've had easier access to them, and they will continue to be provided to us. In April 2022, we're expected that the National Archives will release to the public the 1950 census schedule. So we have had the federal census schedules much longer than we have had easy access to the Freedmen's Bureau, Freedmen's Bank, and United States Colored Troops. So we have quite an interesting research opportunity regarding these 3 record sets. Researchers can improve search opportunities by understanding the purpose of the 4 featured record sets and considering the historical perspectives when exploring and analyzing the evidence that they retrieve. And federal record sets contribute to a comprehensive body of research by providing us evidence that has been created from a very unique time in American history. Hopefully this has been of help to you in understanding the 4 federal record sets.
Thank you.